Within the first weekend of its release, Terrifier 3 not only became the highest grossing film in the franchise, but it also became number one at the box office domestically, even beating Joker Folie à Deux, which, mind you, is a $200 million movie whose previous installment grossed over $1 billion at the box office. Sure, there are a variable amount of reasons why Joker's sequel flopped, but quite the opposite can be said about Terrifier. Hello everyone, my name is Francisco. Halloween has passed. I realized that the plan was to originally get this out by then, which I have missed by a long shot. I did not account for two really good 90 Day Fiancé seasons to be running simultaneously, so that's on me. Sarper, there will never be another like you.
Okay.
Anyways, Terrifier 3 being a huge success is not a surprise, given the IP's huge cult following over the years and how easy it is to market horror movies in general. There was no way this would have failed, especially when you consider how this was made for literal scrap compared to other Hollywood movies. It's really quite impressive how Damien Leone was able to put this all together for such a low budget. Sure, it's not the most perfect looking movie, but that's part of the reason why independent cinema is so appealing and worth championing. If you can make a great movie full of practical effects for $2 million, then imagine what it could achieve with $4 or $6 million. Hell, Brady Corbett's new movie, The Brutalist, was just made for under $10 million, and that's a nearly 4-hour period piece. I just love the kind of selfless storytelling independent cinema brings, and you better believe Terrifier fits right in that category. Now, I completely understand if Terrifier isn't your cup of tea. Even me mentioning the movie to people who haven't seen it will probably already recognize the name or Art the Clown himself for being insatiably violent. Headlines like this do not spawn out of thin air, which in fact actually contributed a lot to the franchise's success. Terrifier has a reputation for its violence. Fair enough, they are very gory movies. However, I don't think it's right to sum it up to just that. The Terrifier movies don't just produce violence, that's not their only goal. I've seen all three Terrifier movies, including the conceptual ones, and I believe what Damien Leone is doing is producing some really creative, high-grade slasher work that hasn't been this fun in a long time. But in order for me to get my point across, I think I need to give some background to the slasher genre in general and how it's evolved over the years. If you love horror movies, then you'll of course be very familiar with the slasher subgenre. It's given us timeless characters like Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, so on and so forth. The way slasher movies were reinvented in the 70s and 80s gave us such a perfect formula that it basically hasn't really changed since then. The premise basically goes, you have a crazy lunatic that goes around killing people in hopefully entertaining ways until the final act, where you'll see if evil can ultimately prevail or not. The formula is so clean and simple that it allows for a lot of great experimentation, but as well as a lot of laziness. I think it's fair to say that for every great slasher movie produced, you'll find 10 shitty ones to go along with it. It's just the name of the game at this point. The slasher genre really got overcumbered just as soon as it was barely getting here, and that's partly due to how cheap and easy they are to produce. I already mentioned Terrifier's budget, but it's definitely not the first to exceed expectations with such a low budget. I think one of the best examples I can use in this scenario is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974. That movie is considered one of the most polarizing horror movies of all time, and that was made with a budget of $140,000, which today would still come roughly under $1 million. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre really paved the way for all horror movies and how it could turn its limitations into some of its greatest strengths. The movie being shot in isolated locations and having such a dirty look is no coincidence, but ultimately a creative choice that left an unforgettable experience that is only further upheld with its based on a true story marketing. It was pure genius in my opinion, and I see these same levels of improvisation in Terrifier. It's not the most polished looking movie in the world, but it does invest time in the scenes where it's gonna count, which are the victim scenes, but I'll circle back to that later. Because slashers were so dominant in the horror space during the 80s and 90s, the genre was already on its last legs by the time the year 2000 even came along. Sure, there was some good ones that dropped here and there, but for the most part, slashers felt very limited to constant recycling of old ideas and reboots. Since the year 2000, most, if not all, the popular slasher movies have already been rebooted. Texas Chainsaw Massacre alone got rebooted like 4 separate times. And this isn't me saying that all the reboots are bad. They're not. Some are actually pretty good. The Scream movies are still going strong, and I at least appreciated the attempt of the new Halloween trilogy, but at the end of the day, all these reboots are still doing the same shit. I mean, they're still making money, so they do have that audience engagement, but by no means feel like they're at the level of popularity that they used to be on. It seems that the conversation has shifted more towards independent filmmaking, along with the rising success of production companies like A24 or Neon. A24 basically built its popularity with the success of films like Midsommar, Hereditary, and The Witch. So when you've been experiencing great horror like this and think about a new slasher emerging in Terrifier, I'm sure it's easy to be skeptical. I for one was, but oh man, it did not take long to turn me around. So my introduction to Terrifier was stumbling upon a screening for the second one in my hometown theater. This theater almost never has independent film showing, which I get it, I live in quite literally nowhere, but considering how nice of a surprise that alone was, I decided to bite the bullet and give it a shot. And let me preface this, there was no one else at that screening. I had the entire place to myself to watch this movie. I wouldn't recommend this as the optimal experience for everyone, but it did help in making me a bit uncomfortable, which isn't a bad setting for a horror movie. The first 30 minutes of Terrifier 2 was more along the lines of what I was expecting it to be, straight into the intense gore with very little substance to support it. The opening didn't leave much of an impression for me, but the more I watched it, the more I realized how inspired it truly felt. There are elements from Halloween, Evil Dead, A Nightmare on Elm Street here which are able to combine into a very imaginative experience that is Terrifier. Art is no doubt a ruthless killer that'll go to the beyond extreme, but he's also kind of a funny dude. In no way is Terrifier delivered as a grounded experience. It can be very slapstick most of the time, from dialogue delivered to kills that make no sense sometimes. Terrifier 3 hams up this part of the movie even more, but it's still an extension from the tone set in the second one. Having this sort of funny bone in Terrifier is why most of the kills work as well as they do. For example, you'll see Art commit some of the most heinous murders, but not before doing a little silly bit first. It just reminds me of the Freddy Krueger character or the scenes from Evil Dead 2 where Ash would just completely lose his mind and pause the entire tone of the movie. It doesn't surprise me though that the humor in Terrifier can get completely overshadowed by its violence, which again is a fair criticism, but the violence actually serves an interesting purpose in regards to the themes. So the story of Terrifier has biblical references. Art is literally a demon of some sort, and Sienna, the protagonist of the movie, plays an almost angelic version of a final girl. The references begin and end there. It's very surface level type stuff, which I don't mind. I think in this case, it helps shape Art into being one of the most vile incarnations of evil, and all of his mayhem builds towards this climax between the two, which is pretty well done in my opinion. Obviously, I know that the extreme measures of the movie can turn a lot of people off, but at least it is trying something, which I didn't expect it to do at all. And the kills, as painful as they are to watch, they definitely are unique. The quality can range from disgusting to hilarious, but you can always expect a good practical effect, which makes all the kills awesome in my book. The story in Terrifier 2 is my favorite of the bunch, not only because it was my introduction to the franchise, but I think it lays out the groundwork very well for future films with the inclusion of Sienna. A good final girl is just as memorable as the killer himself, so Lauren Lavera actually being able to fill those shoes gives Terrifier some solid longevity. I love a good pursuit in the slasher, and these two just perfectly complete each other. I mean, Art is killing her friends, family, and even showing up in her dreams. She can't escape this guy. Watching Sienna just get brutally tormented throughout the movie, and while trying to protect her younger brother at the same time, is what makes her arc so satisfying. It's rare when a slasher is able to cast parts this perfectly, but they nailed it, and it makes complete sense to build the rest of the movies around these two. But while I'm talking about the characters, I also want to mention the performances because they are pretty sweet, especially David Howard Thornton as Art. You wouldn't think his performance would be that great since his character doesn't talk, but that's just replaced with clever physical acting. He commands most of the tone of this movie, so actually being able to come off just a bit charismatic when he's a maniacal freak is talent, I gotta say. The awkward humor he brings to the movie can actually make you laugh while simultaneously making the entire space totally uncomfortable because he's just so unpredictable. Art was played by another actor previous to the official Terrifier movies, and yeah, it's kinda not the same, so please give David his flowers. Lauren Lavera, like I said, is a total game changer when it comes to the flow of Terrifier 2, but don't think I'm discrediting Samantha Scafidi from the first film. She's great too, but I definitely enjoyed her role better in the sequels. I'm trying my best not to spoil a lot, so I'll leave that part for you to discover, but it's quite the leap. Now, if you were to ask me, I would say the appropriate viewing order of these movies should definitely start at the second one and then transition to the third. I'm not saying everything previous to these are bad, but I just think they better serve more as the blueprint for Art. They don't have everything figured out quite yet, but they are still rewarding if you want the extra lore. All in all though, Terrifier genuinely does feel like a breath of fresh air for me. They're definitely not perfect, but as an underdog to all these reboots that have been coming out recently, this one for sure beats them in terms of overall value. You can tell they're having a lot of fun making them, and because they are still an independent production, it is interesting to see them adapt new ideas to each sequel. They all have their own vibe going on, which I appreciate, and it makes me even happier to see all the records that it's breaking. So if you were ever feeling on the line of whether or not to watch these movies, or maybe you have watched them and didn't like them the first time, I hope this video gives you just the slightest nudge to finally give them a go. Anyways, that's it. Please feel free to let me know any of your thoughts and opinions. Do you like Terrifier? Do you hate Terrifier? Who is your favorite 90 Day Fiancé character? Personally for me, I don't think anyone would be replacing Sarber anytime soon. I actually believe he'd be perfect for a role in Terrifier 4. He'd be great as one of those evil demonic manipulators, but that's for Damien Leone to decide. Okay, one final note to leave this video on is I got this copy of Terrifier 2 signed by Damien Leone and David Howard Thornton. Also, Allie, one of my favorite kills from Terrifier 2. I ran out of money after that, so I couldn't get the rest to sign it, but isn't that neat?